Everyone thinks they know how Elizabeth I survived her past. The story goes like this. She buried it. She buried her bastard status. She buried the scandal of her mother. She buried Anne Boleyn. We're told that Elizabeth, the great virgin queen, distanced herself from the woman executed as a traitor and adulteress, that she built her image on her father's legacy, on Protestant triumph, on the Gloriana myth, and left her disgraced mother rotting in the tower's shadow. But what if that's not true? What if the greatest queen in English history carried her mother with her, not in words, but in secrets? What if the woman famous for icy self-control kept, pressed against her skin, a tiny object that told a completely different story? A story of loyalty, memory, and grief she never dared speak aloud. Because hidden in plain sight is one of the most haunting artifacts of Elizabeth's reign, a small gold ring, now known as the Chequers ring, that Elizabeth wore for years. On the outside, it's exactly what you'd expect a queen to wear: jewels, enamel, royal symbols. An object that screams power to anyone who sees it. Tudor roses, royal arms, intricate work that says, "I belong to a monarch." But inside that ring, under a hinged lid so small you could miss it with a blink, are two tiny painted faces. One is Elizabeth herself. The other, a younger woman, dark-haired, elegant, widely believed to be Anne Boleyn. A mother and a daughter locked together in a secret portrait that only Elizabeth could see. Today, on Hidden Crowns, we're going to open that ring and the wound it represents. Did Elizabeth I really erase Anne Boleyn from her life? Or did she choose a different kind of remembrance, one so private she carried it to the grave? Why did she hide her mother's image inside jewelry instead of on palace walls? What other symbols did she quietly use to keep Anne's memory alive? And what does that tell us about a queen trapped between filial love and political survival? By the end of this story, you may never look at Elizabeth I as the cold, motherless queen again, but as a daughter who built a whole country while quietly mourning the woman who died to bring her into it. Before we begin, remember to like this video and subscribe to Hidden Crowns, because some of history's deepest scars are carved into objects the world barely noticed. Elizabeth I was born in 1533, the much-hoped-for son who turned out to be a girl. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, had fought and schemed and charmed an entire kingdom into chaos just to become queen. Anne had replaced Catherine of Aragon, the devout Spanish queen who had held the role for over 20 years. To do that, she'd helped Henry VIII tear apart his marriage, defy the Pope, break England from Rome, and build a whole new church, all for the promise that she would give him a son. For 3 short years, Anne was Henry VIII's blazing star. Her falcon badge, crowned and holding a scepter, was carved into palace walls. Her initial, A, was entwined with Henry's H on ceilings, tapestries, and furniture. She was everywhere, visible proof of a new order. Then, in May 1536, the sky fell. Anne was charged with treason, adultery, and even incest, tried in a court of men who had already decided her fate, and beheaded within the walls of the Tower of London. Elizabeth was not yet 3. Within days, Parliament declared her illegitimate. Her mother's marriage was wiped from the record. Anne's portraits were taken down. Her badges, the falcon, the crowned initial A, were chipped from stone and scraped from wood. Servants were ordered to forget. Chaplains stopped praying for Our Sovereign Lady Queen Anne. Courtiers learned to say the Lady Anne instead. The woman who had been at the center of everything was suddenly a ghost no one was allowed to name. Overnight, Elizabeth went from the king's beloved heir to the inconvenient bastard daughter of a dead traitor. Imagine that imprint on a child. You grow up in royal houses, but you're not quite royal. You eat at tables laid with silver and linen, but you know your place can vanish with a single signature. Your father has had your mother killed. Everyone around you has learned the lesson. Don't say Anne Boleyn's name. You're moved from household to household, from Hatfield to different residences, your allowance rising and falling depending on how angry your father is with whoever currently reminds him of the past. Is it any wonder that as an adult queen, Elizabeth almost never spoke publicly about her mother at all? On the surface, it looks like denial, political amnesia, a woman stepping over the blood on the floor to sit on the throne in a spotless dress. Historians have long pointed out that Elizabeth rarely, if ever, mentioned Anne by name in official documents. She did not issue a grand proclamation proclaiming Anne Boleyn was innocent. She did not rehabilitate her in Parliament. She did not commission great state portraits of her to hang alongside Henry's in the galleries of Whitehall. She did not order grand ceremonies in her honor. To many, that looks like abandonment. Confirmation that Elizabeth chose Henry over Anne, the state over her own blood. But here's the problem. That theory ignores the world she lived in. Think about it. How safe was it, as a queen whose claim to the throne was already contested, to publicly glorify a woman still remembered by many as a witch, a whore, a usurper? Mary, Elizabeth's older half-sister, had spent her entire reign insisting that Anne Boleyn was never really a queen at all. For Mary, Catherine of Aragon was the only true wife of Henry VIII, and anyone who said otherwise was not just wrong, but blasphemous. Catholics across Europe believed Elizabeth herself was the product of an incestuous, illegal union. To them, she wasn't a rightful queen. She was living evidence of sin. If Elizabeth had stood up and declared, yes, Anne was my true mother, her marriage valid, her execution a monstrous crime, what would she have been doing? She would have been calling her own father a murderer, calling previous legal judgments lies, inviting every enemy in Europe to shout, so if your father was wrong then, why should we trust the laws that put you on the throne? She could not afford that. So publicly, she wrapped herself in the image of lawful Tudor kingship. She spoke of her father with respect. She had his image on coins, banners, lineage trees. She used his symbols, his colors, his memory to buttress her own legitimacy. On the surface, it looked like she belonged to Henry alone. But that was only the surface. Because beneath the speeches and the pageantry, in the jewelry she chose, the portraits she allowed, the rare, careful phrases she used, a different Elizabeth appears. A woman who never truly forgot the mother, whose name she almost never said. A ring small enough to fit between two fingers, heavy enough with meaning to carry a lifetime of silence. The ring we call the Chequers ring is named after Chequers, the country house of British prime ministers where it has been preserved for centuries. It's a locket ring crafted in gold and enamel, decorated on the outside with royal motifs. The Tudor rose, the royal arms, and the letters that signal Elizabeth's status and identity. Tiny scrolls of imagery run across its surface. Crowns, flowers, little flashes of blue and white enamel, an entire miniature world of symbolism compressed into a circle of gold. To anyone looking from the outside, it is exactly what you would expect a queen to wear, a symbol of power, of continuity, of her own reign. But the secret is inside. The ring's bezel is hinged. When you lift the tiny lid, the inside reveals two miniature portraits, painted in astonishing detail for such a small space. On one side, Elizabeth herself, in later life, pale face, high forehead, red hair coiled, the familiar queen we know from countless paintings, pearls threaded into her hair, that faint, inscrutable half-smile, the look of someone who has seen too much and learned to show nothing. On the other, a younger woman with darker hair, wearing a Tudor-style dress from the 1530s, with the kind of pearl-trimmed French hood associated with Anne Boleyn's generation. Her features are fine, her expression composed, not a caricature, not a demon, but a quietly poised woman. Most scholars agree, this is almost certainly meant to be Anne Boleyn. So what does that mean? Elizabeth, Queen of England, commissioned or cherished a secret ring that held, side by side, her own face and the face of the mother her father killed. Not on a public wall where ambassadors could see, not on a coin where rebels could mock it, but hidden, literally, in the palm of her hand. This wasn't cheap trinket work. Miniature portraiture in enamel or watercolor required skill, money, and intent. Someone planned these images. Someone chose those faces over all the others that might have been painted there. Why not Henry and Elizabeth? Why not Elizabeth and the Virgin Mary, to emphasize her Virgin Queen image? Why not Elizabeth alone, twice, youth and age? Why a two-part portrait that joined her image to a woman whose memory was still dangerous? Ask yourself, would a queen who truly wanted to erase her mother carry her likeness pressed against her skin? Would she risk anyone discovering it if Anne meant nothing to her? Or is this ring, more than any speech, the real confession Elizabeth never made in words? I am my father's heir, but I am my mother's daughter. Think about how she might have used it. Sitting in council, arguing with old men who had served Henry, men who had whispered against Anne, men who had watched her go to her death and then gone home to supper as if nothing had happened. Her hand rests on the table. The ring gleams in the candlelight. They see only gold and enamel. Only she knows that inside it, the woman they destroyed is looking back at them from her finger. Think of her alone in her chamber after a long day, facing yet another rebellion, another suitor to reject, another sermon about obedience or marriage, another desperate petition from subjects begging for mercy. She twists the ring, opens it, sees two faces, the queen she has become and the queen who never got the chance. Is the second a warning? A reminder of what happens to queens who trust too much? Is it a comfort? Proof that Anne is not entirely gone as long as Elizabeth remembers? Both? We will never know for certain. But we know this. Elizabeth chose to link those images. She chose to keep that link secret. And she chose to keep the ring with her until the end. When she died in 1603, the ring was found among her possessions, a private object, never paraded in public, never surrendered as some passing fashion. She carried that double portrait to her grave. The ring wasn't the only sign that Elizabeth kept Anne alive in her own way. For a queen who almost never said the word mother, Elizabeth sprinkled her reign with small, almost deniable echoes of Anne Boleyn's presence. Let's start with something simple, initials. Anne Boleyn's most famous symbol was the letter B, on her necklace, on her badges, on her jewels. The famous B pendant still haunts paintings of her, pearls hanging from it like drops of solidified light. But Anne's name, Anne, left another obvious mark, the letter A. Elizabeth, as queen, had access to all the jewels that survived from Henry's earlier wives. We know she repurposed some of them, resetting stones into new pieces, incorporating old symbols into her own. Among the portraits and miniatures associated with Elizabeth, there are images showing her wearing letters and pendants that have sparked debate. Some art historians believe that at least one of her pendants, a bold letter A, may have originally belonged to Anne Boleyn, altered or reclaimed for Elizabeth's use. Can we prove it beyond all doubt? No. Miniature portrait evidence is always slippery. Jewels are reused, reset, repainted. but the symbolism is rich. Elizabeth built her public brand around being Elizabeth R., Elizabeth Regina, the solitary sovereign. Yet in private pieces she controlled, we see hints of another story. Subtle letters, specific jewelry choices, images that suggest she carried more of Anne than the official record admits. And then there are her words. Elizabeth rarely referenced her mother outright, but on a few rare occasions she pushed the edge of what was safe. When challenged about her legitimacy, she reminded people that she was the daughter of King Henry VIII, leaning hard on the safe parent, the unassailable king. But in other contexts, later writers and chroniclers claimed she could be heard saying things like, "We both have suffered much, my mother and I." Are these quotes exact, or memories polished by time? It's hard to say. But even the existence of such stories tells us something. People close to Elizabeth believed she felt a bond with Anne, and that she sometimes, cautiously, let that bond speak. Look, too, at her political choices. Who did she favor? Time and again, Elizabeth promoted families and individuals who had stood by Anne Boleyn in the past, or who were linked by blood to the Boleyn line. The Careys, the Knolles's, descendants of Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister. Men whose parents had fallen under suspicion in 1536 now found themselves back in royal favor. She raised the children and grandchildren of those who fell with Anne. She restored some measure of honor to a network shattered in 1536. Was that purely practical, or was it also emotional restitution, a quiet, careful attempt to balance a ledger her father had written in blood? And perhaps the most haunting gesture of all, Elizabeth's relationship with the Tower of London. She had gone there herself as a prisoner during Mary I's reign, fearing that she, like Anne, might never come out alive. She knew the echo of footsteps on that stone, the feel of those damp walls, the horror of wondering whether the sound in the courtyard below was carpenters building your own scaffold. Years later, as queen, she returned for ceremonies and processions. On at least one occasion, she was said to have paused near the place where Anne had been executed, falling silent, tears in her eyes. Is that fact? Legend? History, frustratingly, often deals in the shadow between. But the ring exists. The hints exist. The pattern exists. Publicly, Elizabeth built a myth of herself that left no room for scandal. Privately, she allowed symbols, letters, portraits, jewelry to keep the truth alive. Not loud, not obvious, not enough to start a political fight. Just enough that she could look at her own hand, her own reflection, and know that she had not entirely abandoned the woman who died for her birth. To really feel the weight of the Chequers ring, we have to put Elizabeth back between the two ghosts who defined her life, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. On one side, a father whose name she needed to hold the crown. On the other, a mother whose name could still burn everything down. Every decision she made walked that line. If she praised Anne too openly, she risked reopening battles about legitimacy, religion, and treason that England was exhausted from fighting. If she disavowed Anne completely, she risked losing herself. Because whatever the law said, her body still carried her mother's blood. Her mind still carried her mother's story. So what did she do? She created two Elizabeths. The first was public, the Virgin Queen, God's anointed, daughter of Henry, defender of the faith, the woman married to her kingdom instead to a man. That Elizabeth did not weep for her mother in public. She did not stage confessions. She did not play the tragic orphan. She stood alone. The second Elizabeth was private. The woman who had once been a little girl whisked away from her mother's rooms and told, very quietly, that she would never see those rooms again. That Elizabeth might open a ring and see Anne looking back at her. She might touch a pendant shaped like an A and think of a French hooded figure standing on a scaffold in May sunlight. She might walk through the corridors of Whitehall and remember that her mother had once walked them too, full of hope, full of fear, all of it ending in a sword's clean arc that did not clean anything at all. The Chequers Ring is where those two Elizabeths meet. Outside, monarchy, duty, performance. Inside, the truth she wouldn't or couldn't share with the world. Was it guilt that made her hide Anne's picture? Fear? Shame? Or an act of defiance, a refusal to let the state dictate what she could remember? We will never fully know. But we can say this: if Elizabeth truly wanted to forget Anne Boleyn, that ring should not exist. So what does all of this mean when we step back from Tudor drama and look at the human story underneath? At its core, this is not just a story about a queen and her mother. It's a story about how we live with the parts of ourselves the world tells us to erase. Elizabeth was told from childhood onward that Anne Boleyn was shame, that Anne was scandal, sin, danger, that she should not speak of her, should not claim her, should build her life on anything but her. And yet, in a tiny hidden portrait, in chosen symbols, in guarded gestures, Elizabeth quietly said, "No, she is still mine." She could not rewrite the law. She could not resurrect Anne's body. She could not undo the trial. But she could decide who she carried in her heart and on her hand. The Chequers Ring shows us a queen who knew that love and survival don't always move in the same direction, and who tried, in her own strange way, to walk both paths at once. It also forces us to question how we judge historical silence. We are so quick to say, "She never mentioned her mother, she must not have cared." But what if the silence was not indifference, but armor? What if the lack of speeches hid a storm of feeling that could only be safely expressed in a secret ring, a private tear, a favor shown to a cousin of the Boleyn bloodline? So let's go back to the myth. Did Elizabeth I erase Anne Boleyn from her life? Or did she choose to remember her in the only way she could, through symbols, secrets, and one ring she never truly let go of? If you were Elizabeth, your mother executed, your father a king who could kill on a whim, your entire country watching your every move, how would you honor the woman who gave you life? Would you say her name in every speech, risking your throne? Would you pass laws in her honor, knowing your enemies would pounce? Or would you hide her in a ring, knowing that every time you closed your hand, you were holding her too? Do you think Elizabeth's secrecy was cowardice or courage of a different kind? Tell me in the comments what you think. Did the Chequers Ring prove that Elizabeth I never forgot Anne Boleyn? Or are we reading too much into one tiny piece of gold? And if this story changed the way you see Elizabeth, Anne, and the entire Tudor legend, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Hidden Crowns. Because this is only one of many hidden objects that carry the secrets of monarchs. And next time, we'll open another locked box, turn another ring, and see what truths fall out that history tried to keep shut. This is Hidden Crowns, where history's quietest voices finally speak.